Events are taking place around the world to mark this International Day against homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. Organizers say the rights of LGBTQ people are increasingly at risk in some places. While many countries have passed legislation recognizing the rights of transgender people or same-sex parents, others are rolling back protections. Now, protests have taken place across the United States, as you see right here, where campaigners say hundreds of new laws have been passed which take away the rights of LGBTQ people. Well, this week, Uganda's parliament passed legislation targeting the community, leaving many people fearing for their lives and questioning whether they need to flee the country.
After less than half an hour of debate, Uganda's parliament passed one of the world's strictest anti-LGBTQ bills.
Those in favour say and contra vote nay. The bill passed and the title settled.
The decision was unanimous, with some lawmakers using the moment to go on the attack after seeing the US, EU and major corporations previously condemn the proposed legislation.
Let's protect Ugandans. Let's protect our values, our virtues. We have a culture to protect. The Western world will not come and rule Uganda.
At this safe house for lesbian women in the capital, Kampala, staff are already urging residents to be more discreet, which in some cases means changing how they dress and behave. Under the new draft laws, the death penalty could be imposed for those found guilty of certain same-sex acts. Anyone seen to be promoting homosexuality could also face up to 20 years in jail.
Like, you look at yourself in the mirror before you get home, you're like, do I look too queer? Should I get my rainbows off? Because that's my identity. That's like, I'm colorful. Like, so you have to select your clothing, your jewelry, your everything, because everybody's just on alert and it's dangerous.
Another proposed measure that obliged people to report homosexual activity has now been amended to only require reporting when a child is involved. But despite the bill not yet becoming law, for some, it's just too dangerous to go home.
It's a friend who sent me a message and like, you know what, people are talking about your queerness this side. And you know how it all starts? It starts like that. So they wait for you to come back and they'll do whatever they want to do to you because you're queer. You're not allowed to be in their society.
Others are looking to leave Uganda altogether, with people already asking at this refuge about help seeking asylum abroad. There is some hope here, though, that LGBTQ activists will challenge the draft legislation in the courts and win, with a similar bill overturned by Uganda's Constitutional Court in 2014.
Well, my next guest is Neela Goshen. She is the Senior Director of Law Policy and Research at Outright International. That's a human rights organization that documents discrimination against LGBTIQ people. Neela, it's good to have you on the program. We know that the community is there and legislation, of course, cannot make people disappear. But talk to me about the effect that laws like the one in Uganda, the effect that they have on the LGBTQ community.
Thank you for having me on the show and for paying attention to the fact that today is the International Day against homophobia, biphobia, interphobia, and transphobia. While all of us are fighting against all of these phobias and fighting for equal rights and justice within society, it is clear that there is also a political drive to invisibilize and erase our communities. And that's exactly what laws like the law in Uganda are trying to do. So the law in Uganda at its most extreme includes the death penalty for some forms of consensual same-sex conduct, but it also includes other provisions that activists have described as resulting in death for LGBTIQ people, in making it impossible to exist, even if the death penalty weren't included in the law, right? And so this kind of legislation makes it illegal to speak up on behalf of LGBTIQ rights. It makes it illegal to rent rooms to LGBTQ people. It institutionalizes discrimination. And so clearly the messaging that Ida Hobbit was supposed to enforce, that queer identities are not pathologies, that we are part of social diversity, has not set in. And governments like the government of Uganda would have us not exist.
Yeah, and in our report, the Speaker of the Ugandan Parliament, who is in favor of this anti-LGBTQ bill, said, and I'm quoting here, "The Western world will not come and rule Uganda." I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? That you have countries, particularly in Africa at the moment, who view the rights for the LGBTQ community not as human rights, but as Western rights. How do you change that?
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly something that is politically successful, or has been, for many politicians in Africa. They want to find ways to distance themselves from the West and also to present themselves as protectors of the people. And so they stir up a moral panic where queer people are the enemy that needs to be crushed by any means necessary. So I think the way that we fight against this is by building alliances. We know that when LGBTIQ people are targeted, and particularly with laws that target civil society by cracking down on freedoms of assembly, association, expression, it makes it harder for everyone in Ugandan society to speak their minds, to organize, to associate, to protest. And governments are really strategic about that. They go after our communities one at a time, one minority at a time. But ultimately, what they're trying to do is shut down dissent.
Yeah.
So if we can build bridges to other communities, and this is something Ugandan activists are trying to do, to demonstrate that we're all better off when we push for more freedoms and we don't let governments take our freedoms away. That's, we really need to build mainstream support for LGBTIQ equality.
And, we have seen, for example, in Russia, President Putin, he's pushed through a ban on what is called LGBTQ propaganda. In Turkey, we've got President Erdogan's election campaign speeches that were filled with anti-gay and lesbian sentiment. Talk to me about why it seems that autocratic leaders are targeting the LGBT communities in their campaigns.
Yeah, there's a really strong connection between autocracy and attacks on sexual and gender diversity. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is, like I mentioned before, autocrats are seeking to control the population. And one way they do that is through a sort of divide and conquer, right? Make one portion of the population the enemy of another portion of the population so that people mistrust each other and people believe that their leaders are the ones who are going to save them from one another. And that's a kind of political messaging that can be really appealing and that we need to fight against. I think the other thing is that sexual and gender diversity and rights related to sexual and gender diversity do go hand in hand with this broad range of freedoms. We have been gaining in terms of decriminalization, for instance, right? In 4 countries last year, LGBTIQ people won the right to engage in consensual same-sex intimacy. And the numbers of countries that criminalize are going down. But then the attack is coming from another side saying, you can't talk about these issues. You can't organize around these issues. And that is incredibly convenient for autocrats to kind of progressively narrow the sphere of topics that society is allowed to talk about and organize around. Because ultimately it means that that human rights organizations, independent civil society is just decimated altogether.
Yeah, and I think it's important. You mentioned that there has been progress. Unfortunately, we're out of time. If we had more time, we'd talk about that progress. We will do that, though, another time. Neela Gosha with Outright International. We appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you. My next guest is Maria Snowden, Executive Director of the advocacy group called Outright, which aims to advance equality and help end discrimination. Maria, it's good to have you back on the program. This is the International Day against these phobias, the fear of homosexuals, bisexuals, transsexuals. What do LGBTQ people have to fear most for their safety, for their lives? What do they have to fear most tonight?
So I think obviously this would depend on exactly what country and what context you're looking at. But what we have seen is that I think in many countries we have seen the rights of LGBTIQ people advance over the last several decades. And right now, I have to say I'm less optimistic than I've been in a long time because of this backlash that we see that is, to a large degree, specifically targeting trans people and trans issues. And I think that is the biggest concern at the moment. And in that, of course, it's also like you just talked about the laws in Russia, in Uganda. They have passed a law that we consider to be the worst on the planet, and where we have actually talked about it in terms of being based on genocidal ideology. So there's a lot of concern.
This year's theme is Together Always, United in Diversity. And we were talking about this in the newsroom and wondering, do we belong together? I mean, we've seen this merging of sexual orientation rights with gender identity rights in the last 10 years, particularly in the United States. Your opinion, do gay and lesbians, do they have something in common with trans people or people who have gender identity issues? Are they united some way?
I have to say, I don't think this is a new issue. We, in the sort of LGBTIQ movement, we often track the Stonewall riots that happened in 1969 in New York City as a key moment in our movement. And the Stonewall riots, sometimes talked about as a gay riot or the start of a gay pride movement, really was started by trans women of color. So this idea that we're somehow separate, it's just not based in historical facts, although many of us may not be quite as aware how closely linked these issues are. Yeah. I have to say that, I mean, one of the things that make LGBTQ people targets can be how our gender is perceived. And so if you are a feminine gay man, or if you are a masculine presenting woman or lesbian or not, you can become much more of a target. So the idea that these issues are separate, I don't believe that they are. I think we are much stronger actually when we work together, when we unite.
Let me get your opinion on this. It seems in the United States that just right after same-sex marriage was made legal for the entire country, that is when we started hearing politicians address trans issues and attacking trans people, and we've just seen that crescendo since then. I mean, did you notice that when one issue maybe was put to rest, the other emerged, or is that just a perception issue?
I do think that there is truth to that. I think that there is a backlash that comes with the increased visibility. And I think in some ways the acceptance of same-sex relations and the fact that there's a very significant majority in the United States that are positive to marriage equality. And I think that those who oppose, they don't just oppose trans people's human rights, they oppose, I think, in many cases, human rights for the entire LGBTIQ spectrum. But I think it has just made trans people a better, or sort of a more accessible target, because I don't think that the acceptance levels have reached the same level. In part, I think, because of less visibility. Each individual trans person may be more, if they are out, they may be more visible in their circles, but I think fewer people know someone who is trans.
Well, Maria, it's been good talking with you, and I have to say I like the background you've got there, Outright with Maria on it. Yeah, you're in the big leagues now. Thank you. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight.
Thank you so much.